All right. Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to the inaugural podcast episode of a new show called What Was Good. It's a couple of guys sitting here talking about old things. So if you're into that, thanks for tuning in. I'm Schuyler, and I'm here with my brother,
Zach. Welcome in, everybody.
Yeah, so just to give you a quick rundown, what we were planning to do with this podcast is that we're looking at years in the past, roughly the second half of the 20th century, where we're going to take a look at what was popular, what was good, and see how they turn out 35 to 60 to 15 years later in the future. So tonight, we are looking at the year of 1989.
Now, this is actually one of the years that we were both alive for. We will be covering years that neither of us were alive for, and a very small period that only one of us was alive for. And I'll ruin it right now. It wasn't me that was alive for some years.
Yeah, we've got a few years there. Technically one in the 70s, where I'll be having to fly solo, I guess. I don't remember it very well, I'll say.
Well, yeah. But this year, 89, at least we got some good experience with it, and we were there. We experienced it firsthand, at least.
I will say I don't remember necessarily all of the things we're about to talk about, at least from the contemporaneous time of 1989, some of them from later. So we'll see how it goes.
Yeah.
But anyway, I'm riding on a pretty big high right now because the Mariners just swept the Angels. Won their sixth out of the last seven. So if just as a warning, fair warning to any of you listening, there's also going to be talk about the Seattle Mariners on this podcast occasionally. More so if they're doing well, less so if they're doing their historical average. So just a fair warning to you.
We just got to hit 54% wins, right? That's all it is. And luckily for us this year, that the AL West is, well, okay, it's terrible. And the Mariners are just the least terrible of them this year. So they have a winning record, but I'm happy as they're winning. We'll see how it plays out this year, though.
So I've got some good friends. One is a fan of the Yankees. He grew up in Montana, so it doesn't make any sense.
What?
Well, you know, when you live in Montana, you just like whoever's winning.
I guess that's true. You don't have a team to call your own.
And another good friend who grew up in Pennsylvania. So there, I got a Yankees fan and a Phillies fan, both of whom have won World Series more recently than the Mariners, a.k.a. they've won one.
Yeah, at least one.
Been dying to be able to join in the same conversation about, like, oh, yeah, you remember 2009 or whatever. Someday it'll happen. And I'm dying for a Mariners-Phillies World Series because I will probably need to take out a second mortgage if that happens to afford
Get to every game.
Yes. Flying back and forth across the country, going to every game.
Oh, man, I would
there
love
goes
to
my
join
kid's
you for
college
that.
tuition.
What's college anyway? But this year, the Phillies and Yankees are both really good, so that makes it hard.
It could be a really exciting playoffs if things continue as they are right now, which in baseball is, you know.
Who knows? Someone gets
know.
hot, and then all of a sudden your team is really good, or someone stops being good, and then you lose 12 out of 14, and you're out of the playoff picture. So, who knows? Still a long season.
But speaking of what is good and what was good, maybe we should add in World Series reviews from the years that we're looking at. Can you go back? Could I go back on YouTube and watch the 1989 World Series? I remember it was the San Francisco Giants and the Oakland A's. It was the Battle of the Bay.
Wait, was that the Earthquake series? There was one game there was an earthquake in San Francisco. I can't remember if that was 89 or not.
I may be getting my years confused. It was like 88, 89, 1990 was the Reds. I know that. So it was 88 or 89. One of those years. So we'll just say it was 89.
Yeah, we're not too far off, at least. Someone will correct us if we're that wrong.
Yeah, speaking of, if you want to get a hold of us and correct us, feel free to email us at whatwasgoodpod@gmail.com. We don't have a website. We don't have a subreddit. We don't have basically any online presence except for this Gmail account. But we're happy to take emails, and one time only, actually, probably this will be available anytime. If you email us and provide your name and your home address, I will handwrite you a postcard. This is Schuyler. I will handwrite you a postcard on one of my many hundreds of vintage postcards that I have, and put it in the mail, and you will actually get a physical piece of mail as evidence that this podcast exists.
And I fully approve of this. I don't have postcards to send myself, but I fully approve of him sending you postcards if you're willing to give your home address.
Yeah, if you get in early, it's free. Once we get big and start having a Patreon presence, you're going to have to pay $5 a month if you want a postcard. So this is your...
Subscription level.
Yes, exactly. Subscription level gold or higher will get you a postcard. But for
Let's get
now...
you on that platinum where you get our home phone numbers as well. Well, wait. Hold on.
Hold on. I did not agree to this. Cut that. So, all right, well, let's talk about 1989.
Yeah, it was quite the year. I mean, for a lot of different reasons, like the movies that we're going to be looking at and the book and the album we're going to be looking at all had their reasons for being good. But 89 was, looking at movies specifically, there was a lot of good stuff happening that year. And Batman, which is the movie we'll be looking mainly at today, was the top grossing movie of 1989. And it was followed up by some other pretty heavy hitters for that time too. So yeah, we're going to get into it and look at why we think Batman might have been the top grossing and what we thought of the movie and all sorts of things about it.
Yeah, and just to back up 1 second, so a little bit of more housekeeping about the podcast. So we're going to take each year over 2 episodes. The first episode,
yes,
what we're doing today, is the most popular movie, book, and album that came out in 1989. There's a little preview. Our album that we'll be talking about today actually came out in 1988, but was the biggest seller in 1989.
Yeah, so, yeah. Do we need to specify we're looking at the top grossing, so
yeah.
These brought in the most money. That's most popular, that's questionable, but they were definitely the highest grossing of each of their categories.
Yeah, and then in our second episode for each year, we'll talk about the award winners. The Best Picture, the Academy Award Best Picture, the Grammy Best Album, and the National Book Award for Fiction winner. Sometimes they overlap. I would say, looking at the list, more often than not, they don't.
Yeah.
When they overlap, I don't know what we're going to do. We'll just talk extra long about each movie. Who knows? But anyway, today we're talking
We'll look at some other movies or something then.
Today we're talking about the highest grossing cultural products of 1989.
I love it. Yeah, so like I mentioned already, Batman was the top grossing movie in 1989. It's followed up by some other pretty big movies, actually, if you think back about or what was going on there. We had Back to the Future 2. We had Dead Poets Society, which I had a friend who said that should have been the Best Picture movie. So I'm not going to argue with him on that. We can cover that more next time. But there was a lot of really influential movies that came out in 1989, or at least as I remember them. Oddly enough, probably one of the movies I remember the most that came out in 89 was The Little Mermaid. I remember watching a lot of Disney movies growing up, and that was another one that was a 89 movie, and it was a pretty big movie as well back then.
It was pretty big. I remember seeing that one in the theater, and probably my favorite movie of 1989. There's a couple that you haven't mentioned. Actually, I'll go with 3 that I saw on the list. Honey, I Shrunk the Kids was a classic.
Mm-hmm.
Love that one from 1989. I just recently watched last year for the first time The Abyss, which is another 1989 movie, James Cameron movie. I thought it was fantastic in its 4K director's cut re-release. I haven't seen the original, but the director's cut was pretty good. It's great to see in the theater. And my favorite, way down the list, and probably because it ran into the juggernaut of Batman over the summer of 1989, was Weird Al Yankovic's classic UHF. That's the one from that year that I've probably seen more times than any other. In the high dozens, I would say.
It is one of the few movies that I still have the DVD of. I used to collect DVDs, and I probably only have like 30 movies left now, but I still have my UHF DVD.
Well, I know we're getting kind of far away from Batman, but one of my the highlights of my entire movie-going life is 2018 or 19 at the Washington, D.C. Comedy Festival. I took both of my children to see UHF with live commentary by Weird Al himself.
Oh, man.
It was one of the highlights of my entire life. We had such a great time. Emo Phillips was there. Like, this was just an incredible experience. But again, that's like number 112 or something on the highest
Something
grossing
like
movies
that.
of 1989. So maybe we shouldn't take too much time on it. But just wanted to point out that that's probably my favorite movie from the year.
It's a very good one. Absolutely, yeah. All right, so getting back to Batman. Obviously, this was a Michael Keaton movie. Jack Nicholas. Or Nicholson, I'm sorry. Nicholas is someone else. Kim Basinger. Some pretty big names. Billy D. Williams is in there as well. A lot of big name Vaguely. But yeah, a lot of big named actors in this, and obviously being directed by Tim Burton was pretty big deal as well. That was already a recognizable name, and has a certain style to his movies, for sure.
So how much did this one gross? I think I looked it up. It was something around 250 million, right?
Yeah, 257 million. Yep.
What's that in today dollars?
17.8 billion. I don't know.
Yeah, it's a lot. Anyway, I should have looked that up and should have done the math. So we're talking a big movie. This is like Marvel Cinematic Universe big, right?
Yeah, this was huge it was even quite a bit, like 50 million more than the next movie on the list even. So it's still like substantially bigger than anything else that year.
Okay, that makes sense to me because I remember that you were a little bit younger than me, but I remember this being the first movie in my experience that I have vague recollections of that absolutely dominated the culture. Like, Batman was everywhere in the summer of 1989. Happy Meals. I think you even sent me a link to a picture of some Taco Bell stuff that featured
Taco
Batman.
Bell commemorative cups. Yeah, you got to get them all.
I bet you can find those on eBay. The toys were everywhere. Like, that's all we played on the playground at recess was like Batman. It's all we did in the neighborhood with the neighbors was play Batman. And so
there's a lot of great toys, like the Batmobile. I remember our neighbor having the toy Batmobile, and it was just like the coolest thing you could imagine. And it was way cooler than any cars that existed in 1989. So it was just, it was so marketed out that everything in the movie could be bought. Essentially, you could buy everything you saw, and that's part of the reason why it was so huge in the culture.
And also maybe part of the reason why I will admit I don't really like the movie all that much. We can get into some of the details, but also, spoiler alert for everybody listening, if you haven't seen the 35-year-old movie that we're talking about and you don't want to know what happens in it, you should probably stop listening. But I figure when something's this old, we don't need to worry about spoilers. So we're going to be talking about what happens in the movie.
Yeah, and I think we're good with the movie or the range of years we're going to be covering. I think we're beyond the point where it's spoiling anything. Because if you haven't watched it by now, then I don't know. You're probably not even listening to our podcast anyway.
Yeah, the statute of limitations is definitely up for this.
Yeah, for sure.
For the crimes committed here in this movie. So I'll go out. I'll just go ahead and get started. Like, I think the movie looks great. Like, it's got such a distinctive comic book style. Like, a lot of the shots look like they're torn right from the pages of a comic book. You've got these kind of Dutch angles going on all the time. This real chiaroscuro lighting. Looks amazing. And there's nothing in between that I found the things that look amazing. You've got a series of, kind of incredible set pieces going on throughout the movie with different scenes with the Joker, different scenes with Batman, the scenes where they're together fighting. And in between those really cool looking scenes, you got real threadbare story that barely makes any sense. So while I liked looking at the movie, I wouldn't say that I really liked the movie.
You're not going to watch Batman for the plot. you're like you said, there's a lot of cool visuals, and it would be a great movie to kind of have on in the background as just something there. But it's not the movie you want to go into thinking you're going to get a great story out of it, because it just doesn't exist.
So what is the basic story? Like, give us a rundown from your perspective. What is this about?
The best I can make out is Batman's parents are killed. He gets this idea in his head that he's gonna get revenge, and with all this money that his family has, and this is in Gotham City, of course. And there's an organized crime boss ring, and they're kind of running the town. There's a new DA who is gonna get hard on crime and gonna take care of everything.
And that's the Billy D. Williams character, right? That has like 5 lines in the entire movie.
I counted them. It is. It's exactly 5 lines that Billy D. Williams has.
Taking one of the most recognizable voices and faces in Hollywood and completely wasting him. I was so bummed. I was like, yes, Lando Calrissian. And then he disappears, comes back for like 1 line halfway through, and then a couple more at the very end. I'm like, oh man, Burton, you wasted him.
Yeah, but then Batman does something to the Joker, or no, he does something to, I can't even remember. What's the Joker's character's name?
Jack.
Doesn't matter. But anyway, the Joker is created, let's say, and Batman has a hand in that. From that point on in the story, it's the Joker's complete insanity that is pretty much running the movie from there. And it's just interactions between Joker and Batman from there on out that are related, I guess, but not entirely.
Yeah, so I get why the Joker hates Batman, right? Batman makes him fall into a vat of acid or something. The part that I didn't understand, the part that I really struggled with, was the whole organized crime angle. Organized crime exists to make money, right?
Yeah.
That's what they do. So the Joker, in the, frankly bizarre scene with the other crime bosses, takes over Gotham City's organized crime by electrocuting a dude, which ostensibly this was a kid's movie, right? Like, all my friends saw this movie. I wasn't allowed to. You weren't allowed to.
No.
But a lot of 10-year-olds were seeing this movie, and that is freaking terrifying.
It reminds me of the scene from Raiders of the Lost Ark where the guy melts.
Oh my gosh, that's burned in my memory from, I think I was even a little bit older when I saw that. But yeah, so the Joker electrocutes this guy in a meeting, and suddenly everybody's afraid of him, so he's in charge. But instead of doing organized crime, he magically gets a bunch of lackeys that dress in purple and green and carries out bizarre, pointless terrorism, essentially.
If you want to call it that, yeah.
Yeah, he poisons a bunch of cosmetics, which, to be fair, makes for some great visuals when all the people on the news can't use their cosmetics, and so they're all pimply and they look terrible on camera because they're afraid of using the poisoned cosmetics that will kill them. But that doesn't make any sense because there's no money involved.
Yeah.
And then the big scene, the Joker throws a party downtown, invites people because he's going to be throwing out hundreds of thousands of dollars or something, but then is going to release a bunch of poison gas and kill people with a rictus smile on their face. Like, none of it actually makes sense from a perspective of an actual some person or character trying to do something. It's just a way to get Batman and the Joker together, which is why I just didn't enjoy it. It was like the plots that the Joker's doing to get Batman involved have to make sense at least a little bit.
They're so separate. Like the scene where he wants to meet Vicky Vale, Kim Basinger's character, in the museum/cafe or whatever it is. And he sends her a gas mask, And then everybody else is knocked out and she's still just fine. And he comes in with his goons and just starts splashing paint and spray painting all the art in there. There was a line in that scene though that I really liked, and it's where he called himself a fully functional homicidal artist. And when he said that line, my thought was, you have to look at this movie from the perspective that Joker is absolutely insane. Like, there is no thought patterns that work in his head. He's just an absolutely insane character. And when you look at it from that perspective, the movie comes closer to working. It doesn't work, but it comes closer to working. But there's just so many disjointed, all over the place things that are hard to follow. And Batman ends up with Joker in every scene, but it's not till the end that something actually happens.
Yeah, and I've rewatched a couple of other Tim Burton movies recently. Beetlejuice, The Nightmare Before Christmas. And this seems to be a problem that Tim Burton has. Like,
I see.
Both of those movies are famous, right? Especially when you look at Nightmare Before Christmas. Incredibly striking visuals. Looks amazing.
Yeah.
But the story's dumb. Doesn't really make sense. You look at Beetlejuice, the story's absolute nonsense, but it's got these great visuals. So it's the same problem here. You've got Tim Burton with these images in his head, and he's able to put them on screen, which is an incredible talent.
Yeah.
But I feel like he needs to have somebody else there that's helping him get a plot or a story that goes from A to B to C to D to get to these visuals, because we've got some pretty incredible stuff here. I love the Batmobile. I think it's the best Batmobile design from any of the Batman
I agree with that.
reboots or rehashes or whatever you want to call them. The Batwing, shaped like the bat symbol, so good. Flies
Pretty
up
cool.
right in front of the moon. What a great shot. And then he comes down, and this incredible, cool Batwing that cuts the balloons free so they float away and the poison gas doesn't get known. It's indestructible, and then gets shot down by a single bullet from a comically large pistol. Like,
and that brings up a point. Like, what was this movie? Was this an action movie? Was this a comedy? Was this drama? Who knows? The fact that Joker is shooting a 6-foot-long pistol at the Batwing and able to knock it out of the sky, what is it? I'm still not sure.
Maybe that's why it worked so well. There was enough in it for people that wanted to see an action movie. There was enough in it for kids to want to go see essentially a kids movie, what comic book movies used to be.
Yeah.
Kids. There's enough there. There's a little bit of romance. There's a little bit of, horror, scary stuff. So maybe that's why it was so popular. It's just enough for everybody.
Okay, I want to go back to what you said about romance. Now, okay, so I would assume you're talking about the Vicky Vale and Bruce Wayne.
No, I'm talking about the Joker and Vicky Vale.
Oh,
no,
okay.
Of course I'm talking about. Of course I'm talking.
Well, that was
about
the thing
Bruce.
too. That's the Joker pursued that, but obviously
Well,
nothing.
very romantic, we'll say.
Yeah, but I was, as I was watching that, I remember thinking, wait a minute. There's only been like 2 interactions between Bruce Wayne and Vicky Vale in this movie, and all of a sudden they're like deeply in love with each other, but it's never really conveyed. Like, Vicky Vale's character, Kim Basinger, doesn't really have any reactions to anything in the movie. Everything is kind of just flat. I mean, she does fine for her character, but it's just like, it's too flat of a relationship, and neither of them really seem to care that much, even though they both act or say they're in love with each other in a way, but it just never really materializes.
Yeah, I mean, like, who's not going to be in love with somebody that looks like Michael Keaton that's also fabulously wealthy? But what is an interesting thing is, if you want to look at it from that romance angle, the romantic relationship between the Joker and Batman is far more powerful, I think, than Vicky Vale. They are very, very into each other, and they only exist because of each other, which we learn at the end in one of my least favorite things about the entire movie. When in a a combination of flashbacks, it's revealed that guess who killed Bruce's parents?
No.
It's true. It was the guy whose name we can't remember who became the Joker. So not only did Batman create the Joker, but the Joker had created Batman in the
We've
past.
come full
It's very
circle.
Greek tragedy in there.
Yeah.
You know,
And
set the source of your own destruction.
I agree with you. That seemed so forced at
But
the end.
boy, did I dislike that.
I was disappointed. I remember turning to my wife and saying, "Oh," I didn't even have words for it. It was just like, "Yeah, I guess, fine, that works," but it doesn't. So, but the end of the movie, though, there was one thing that did bother me other than that. Oh, so all throughout the movie, Batman had no issues with any of the bad guys per se, like any of the goons that attacked him, or even Joker trying to get at him. He never struggled with fighting them off. But there was one guy, the last guy he fought before Joker, that really just kicked Batman's ass. I mean, he just threw him all over the place, and that was the only goon or villain in the whole movie that was able to actually get to Batman. And then when he finally got through that goon and tackled the Joker problem, no issues there. So there's only one villain in the whole movie, and it wasn't even the Joker who was able to actually get to Batman. So that was another thing that threw me off a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it's like they got to make sure it's not too easy.
Yeah,
and instead you fall into that weird trope. So I did not like this movie. I was a bit disappointed. I could see why it was so popular. It was the first big comic book movie since probably Superman 2 that was any good.
Was Superman 2 any good?
It was okay.
Okay.
3 and 4 were like way downhill. And it was extremely influential. If you look at what came afterwards, you had all kinds of comic bookish movies coming out then, like Dick Tracy the next year, which I actually still love.
I have fond memories of that one, but I don't think we ever get to review that one.
Yeah, so Dick Tracy, we had like the Green Lantern, all the way up until the point where it was being parodied in Mystery Men. Did you ever see Mystery Men?
Yes.
Spectacular movie that ended, I would say, the late 80s and 90s comic book run, because by then it was a joke.
Yeah.
And then it got rebooted with, Iron Man and all that, and where we are today, for better or worse. But Batman was incredibly influential. It's hard to overstate how big of a deal it was then, despite the fact that watching it 35 years later, you're like, eh.
Yeah.
And if you look at like what people say about it, like, it's not very well respected.
Yeah.
Of all the Batman reboots, this one's like, oh yeah, Michael Keaton, Batman's, yay! Which is why probably there was that cameo of him as Batman in last year's The Flash.
That's right.
Which, I feel like I should be fair to Batman. It's so much better than The Flash. The Flash was terrible. And so as for all my complaints about this one, it's still worth watching. It's cool to look at.
Yeah, for sure.
Whether it makes sense, who cares?
Yeah. And to be fair, Batman Returns was a better movie. Mainly because it had Danny DeVito in it, but that's neither here nor there for this movie. But if we look at giving this a grade, my initial thought was, man, this was not a good movie. I ended up landing on giving it a C- myself, just because it was too hard to follow and it was fun to look at, but yeah, it wasn't there for me.
Okay, well, I'm going to be a little bit higher than you just because I think some of the visuals are so striking that I ended up at a C. So it's not a thumbs up for me.
No.
But it's like if you like Batman, you got to watch it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's definitely like the origins of what we know Batman to be now.
Right. I'd say it pales in comparison to the Christopher Nolan Batman trilogy.
Yeah.
It's far better than the Joel Schumacher Batman movies. Like, those are pure camp. Like, the one with Arnold Schwarzenegger as Mr. Freeze. I mean,
Yeah. But, I mean, Batman is such a unique character, and he has such a reputation as just being this hard, no-nonsense that you can do a lot of things, but, yeah, this one just didn't do it.
Yeah, so stay tuned for 25 years from now when we finally get around to discussing 2022's The Batman, which I think was actually a pretty fantastic movie, but I can't talk about it now. We have to wait until 2045.
Statute of limitations.
Yes. So we'll transition now to talking about the number one sales album of 1989, which was Bobby Brown's Don't Be Cruel.
Actually came out in 1988, but like you said, this was the highest grossing of 1989, which is totally different than with the movies, where it only looks at the movies that came out that year. But with music not being as limited, it's like we can look at albums that came out the previous year but were the highest grossing for that year.
Well, so for you young ones listening to this podcast, albums used to be a thing.
Oh, yeah.
They used to come out and you'd get one single coming out 1 month, 2 months later you'd get another single. And so you could get 2 years of an album being extremely popular, which is kind of what happened here. And at the time, I was probably not allowed to listen to this kind of music.
Definitely not.
But I wasn't going to anyway. So listening to it now to figure out what it sounded like, I was right on board with him. So one of the biggest songs on this album, Bobby Brown's Don't Be Cruel, is My Prerogative, which I know the name and I know the reference, but I don't think I'd ever heard it before.
Oh, really?
But I was listening to it and I was right on board because it turns out it was a misheard lyric, but I thought I heard him say, "I don't mess around with Beetlejuice." And I was like, that's right, Bobby Brown. Beetlejuice is not good. I don't know what he actually said, but I looked at the lyrics and couldn't find any reference to Beetlejuice. So I was like, well, this is perfect because I didn't like that Tim Burton movie either. Didn't like Batman. I hear you, Bobby Brown.
But My Prerogative, like, that was my favorite song on this album. And there's only 9 songs on this album, which...
Well, yeah, but each one is like 6 minutes long.
Yeah, there's that. But so the title album, or the title song, Don't Be Cruel, obviously it's the first song on the album, and I think it's like 6 minutes and 48 seconds or something like that, just almost 7 minutes long, which is unheard of today. Like, songs are what, 3.5, maybe 4 minutes nowadays, if that even. But there's something that also you don't see nowadays with, especially in that song. There was I timed this out. I listened to it several times and timed it out. A 56-second reprise with no words, just the synthesizer and music just going on, like a minute of no singing or anything, just instrumentals essentially. And, it kind of worked.
Yeah, I noticed that, and I was listening in the car once with my wife, who, as soon as the song started, was like, "Oh my gosh, I know this song." And that instrumental part was what she remembered the most. Then the next song came on, and she was like, "Oh my gosh, I know this one too." The next song came on. It's called Ronnie, I think. And she knew that one too. And so I did not know any of these songs. I don't think I'd ever heard any of these before. Or if I had, I don't have any memory. But it's weird how this music that you hear when you're a kid is stored somewhere in your brain.
Absolutely.
And you hear it, and it just comes back. You don't know the words necessarily, but it's definitely there. And this album, honestly, it's a pretty good album. It's full of bangers. I mean, I'd love to know a little bit more about the state of pop and R&B at the time. Like I said, I didn't listen to it. And so where was this in the spectrum of an R&B song with a rap verse? Now, that's like every pop song has a rap verse.
Yeah,
but was this the progenitor of that? Like, was this a thing before this album?
He was, like, I was curious about that too, and I was looking it up, and kind of, like, this was its own thing, and they called it New Jack Swing, and that was kind of a mix of so many different styles. It had R&B and funk and dance and soul, so it was kind of its own thing of putting everything together, that it was unique from most other things that were being played at the time. But it was, I mean, taking in all of those different styles as well. So it was different, but the same, if that makes sense.
Wow, I did not know any of that. Maybe I should have done a little bit more research on pop music history, but wait till we get to like 1993.
Oh, you're gonna rock it.
Oh my! That's the only radio station I listen to is the one on Sirius XM Lithium that just plays songs from the 90s.
We'll be good to go then.
Yeah,
I think 1990 is coming up before too long for us.
Yeah, although I believe our next year is 1958, and so I'm completely out of luck there.
Yeah, same here. But wait. I got a joke I need to add in here. Since you mentioned the song, I believe it's called Roni. It's not... the way he pronounces it within the song, I think, is Roni, at least. So, my wife said, don't tell the joke, but yeah, I'm a dad, so I kind of have to tell this joke. Yeah, I have to. And so, the joke is, what does Bobby Brown call a well-cooked mac and cheese? It's a tenderoni. Which is one of the lyrics in that song.
Cut that.
But yeah, it's one of the lyrics in the song that he says, and if you look at the lyrics, it actually says on the lyrics it's tenderoni as one word.
Wow.
Yeah, there you go. But that was one of the songs that I wasn't crazy about on the album. It was like overall I really liked the album, but that one, and there's a couple others that weren't quite as strong as the singles from that album, the Don't Be Cruel and My Prerogative. Those were the big ones, and I felt like those were definitely the strongest songs as well. There's a couple that are just kind of a little too soft and didn't have enough of an edge to them, I felt.
Oh, I kind of enjoyed some of the slow jams. It was nice because a lot of the singles seem to have the same, tempo, same kind of rhythm to them. And they kind of blended together, and I liked when he, slows it down with a nice little slow jam. And I did also really like, I think this was probably coming at the tail end of it, being there at the tail end of the 80s, but the obsession or just fascination with the ability to make any kind of sound you wanted. Oh. Didn't go so far into like putting in sirens, but like fake drums. You could make your synthesizer make any kind of sound you wanted and just put these little like doodles in there. I enjoyed that, but I feel like that could get old really quick. The album wasn't long enough for it to get old. I liked it.
Yeah, let me read. One of my notes says almost to the exact thing that you just said. The synthesizer is overused completely, but that was true of every single hip hop and pop song in the 80s. That was just the standard, and he had some. There's one sound effect in particular. Which song was it in? I believe it was in. I think it was in Rock With Ya. That was the name of the song.
That was a good one.
I like that one. But I heard a sound effect in there, and it was clearly a sound from Super Mario Kart. I don't know what that sound was in Super Mario Kart, but when I heard it in the song, I instantly thought of Mario or Toad or one of the other characters jumping through something in that game, and I was transported playing Super Mario Kart, the original.
Which is really interesting, because if we look at the timeline, Super Mario Kart came out after this album, so it's possible, and we'll have to do some research to verify this, that Nintendo actually sampled Bobby Brown's Don't Be Cruel. Now, if that comes out to be true, that would be an incredible find, and I would be extremely happy with this. But overall, I think this was a pretty banger album.
Yeah, I agree. I was thinking through things last night. There was 8 songs having to do with love, essentially, or like a relationship. My Prerogative was the only one in this album that wasn't about a girl, essentially. So that was...
Have you ever listened to this band? Nobody really knows them much, but they're called the Beatles. Well, boy, do I have some news for you about what their songs were about. I mean, until you get to like the Octopus's Garden and Maxwell's Silver Hammer. They got big by singing about, guess what? Girls.
Yeah. Surprise, surprise. But that made me start thinking. I was like, so why is My Prerogative so much different? Like, because it's just about him doing what he wants to do, and that's my money, right, Ted? That's another lyric in the song. But I looked into it, and he said this album was complete without My Prerogative, or he thought it was done, but then he listened to the whole thing and said, there's not enough here. So My Prerogative was the last song he added to the album, and ended up being the biggest hit of the whole album as well. So that was an interesting thing that I discovered.
He just took his prerogative as the artist to put another song on there.
For sure. He went and said, hey, I need someone to help me with this and get me my prerogative. I want more.
A little bit of braggadocious, you can't tell me what to do. I like it.
Yeah, that's Bobby Brown for you.
Now, this one's hard for me to give a grade to because I don't have a long history of listening to R&B and pop.
Same here.
So coming in blind without even much of a feeling for what was going on in pop music in 1989, I didn't really start paying attention until maybe 2 or 3 years later after seeing Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure and realizing that music outside of contemporary Christian existed.
Also a 1989 classic. Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, that is.
Oh, yes. Yeah, another great one. But coming in pretty much blind to this without much knowledge about Bobby Brown in general or about his history or his music, it really landed well with me. This one's a B+. Not quite an A, but it's definitely I can see why this was the biggest seller.
Yeah. And I am exactly on board with you on that. I have it down as a B+ as well.
Ding, 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 ding.
Yeah, hey, we're gonna agree on some things actually, and that's gonna be good actually. I got to tell you though, like when you listen to the album as a whole thing, it's great, or it's B+ material. At the beginning and end though, there's the reprises where it's like the intro essentially to Don't Be Cruel, and then at the last little bit they play it for another 15 seconds. I had my son listen to the first 30 seconds of every single song. Guess which one was his favorite?
The outro?
No, the intro. The
okay.
Reprise at the beginning is like, oh yeah, I could get into this.
Yeah, I will say I appreciate the fact that the skits that showed up in a lot of later, especially hip-hop and R&B albums, were not there yet. Like, that was one of my least favorite things about 90s hip-hop and R&B.
Yeah.
90s into the 2000s. I don't need to hear you guys do an unfunny skit. Just get to the music.
just sing for us. Play your synthesizers.
Yes. Well, anyway, that was 1988's Don't Be Cruel by Bobby Brown, biggest seller of 1989. Pretty good album. Go give it a listen.
Yeah,
wherever
definitely
you get your music.
Definitely worth the 45 minutes for the album it is. So, yeah.
Yeah, so that brings us to the top-selling book of 1989. Fiction book, let's be clear.
Yes, fiction, yeah. Non-fiction would be a little bit boring, and nobody bought those. Well, wait, I can't say that for sure, but...
Well, somebody did if it was the top-selling. But the top-selling book of 1989 was Tom Clancy's Clear and Present Danger. Now, there's also a movie of this, so we'll get to the movie after the book, but we'll talk about the book first. So this was... I think 4th or 5th in Tom Clancy's string of really huge spy novels.
Yeah, and I think it's I think you're right. I think it is the 4th one, and nowadays they're being called the Jack Ryan books. So I get it.
Yeah, these are Tom Clancy's Jack Ryan books. I think this was probably, from my reading, about the time that Tom Clancy was moving from being an author to a brand.
Yeah.
I have some inklings that there may have been some ghostwriting in this one. But this was a long book, but an incredibly easy read. I remember reading this one back in 1996, I think. I read it in the hospital after I'd had my appendix removed.
I remember that.
Yeah, I had nothing to do except watch VHS cassettes of The Simpsons and read books. So that was my introduction to Tom Clancy. So this was a reread, but for the first time in years.
Well, you said it was 96, so we can do the math.
Oh yeah. So what's that? 28 years. It was a really fun reread, I'll say. So
Yeah.
one of the things that was the most fun about this is if you've read any of the Jack Ryan books or seen in the Amazon show or watched any of the movies, they take place in Washington D.C. When I read this originally, I was a kid living out in the Pacific Northwest.
Oh.
Now I'm reading it as an adult living here in Washington D.C. or in the D.C. area, and there's all these things that I know where they are. Like my office is 2 blocks away from the FBI building downtown.
Nice.
Like I know exactly what he's talking about that right there. There's one scene where a couple of characters meet up to go to an Italian restaurant at Seven Corners in Virginia. I drove past that Italian restaurant on the way home from the grocery store today. Shout out to Pistone's Italian Inn. It's still there 35 years later.
So you have a lot more frame of reference than I would, because these are just obtuse places to me that, they may exist, but to me it's just, I'm reading about them. Okay.
Right. And you don't need to know that they exist. But it's nice that he actually there's some verisimilitude to it, right? These are real places. And he at least had enough impulse or dedication to actually make it realistic, which I appreciate.
Yeah. And like you said, this is a really pretty long book. I think it was like 650 pages or something like that. But again, pretty easy read. First read for me, I had never read this before. And I noticed later on, and we get to read the 1988 book, which is the prequel to this essentially. So it'll be a little bit out of order. But this being a Jack Ryan novel, I guess I have a little trouble with that because I didn't feel like this was a book about Jack Ryan. So when I've heard it referred to that way, yes, it has Jack Ryan in it, but I didn't feel like this book was about him or for him so much. It was just a bunch of stories that all end up coinciding essentially, or kind of they're related to each other. One kind of leads to the next, and it's a lot of interesting things that happen for sure.
Yeah, what I have written down, what I wrote down while I was reading it is one thing happens and then another. Which, of course, a lot of books are like that, right?
That's how time works.
Yeah, that's how time works. But what I could not get out of my head while reading this book is the image of this huge diagram that was written before the book. Like, here's this story. Now we're going to go over here to the secondary story in the same time frame, then to this third one. And so it feels very diagrammatic rather than this idea for a story that Tom Clancy had. It was like, okay, we're going to start with here. We're going to do these other side stories. We're going to add a couple more. We're going to expand to like 8 or 9 different plots in the middle of the
10,
book, and then
12,
we'll slowly pare them back down where they all come together here at the end, and there we go. And so you've got this huge plot diagram, and then the actual writing is just to fill in all the connective tissue, if you will, to get from these one plot point to another, which fine, it read really smoothly, right?
Yeah,
I was never confused about what was going on. There's a lot of characters, and sometimes you can like forget who's who, but essentially it moves only in one direction.
Always.
And there's no flashbacks, there's no flash forwards. Everything moves pretty linearly, which in some ways is pretty boring, but at least it's easy to follow.
Yeah, and I mean, to some extent, I did have trouble. I would get a paragraph in before I'd realize who I was reading about, because there were so many different characters, and they all had their own story. So I'd be reading and then like stop and say, wait, hold on, is this about Escobedo? Is this about Cortez? Is this about Ryan? Is this about any of the other characters? But sometimes I'd be like a little confused for a minute, but then it all came together. It comes together pretty quickly, unless it was just one of those one paragraph quick hitters where it didn't really have much to do with anything, and then all of a sudden you're back to another story.
Right. And so the main story of this is that there's drugs coming into the country from South America, and the U.S. wants to do something about it. That's essentially the entire setting, and then how things play out. But what you were talking about with the different characters coming in and out, what I both appreciated and really disliked about the book was that it reminded me of House Hunters International. I don't know if you've ever watched that show.
I got to hear this connection.
But it's a show on, I don't know, HGTV, and there's constant referring to things that have already happened because there's been a commercial break. So they have to remind you of where you were, which I feel like this book did all the time. Like, you don't need to tell me this about Ding Chavez again, the special ops guy. I already know he's like this. But it's essentially there for people that put down the book, pick it up a week later, a month later. And it's the kind of book where you don't actually need to start back at the beginning because everything you need to know constantly is reintroduced every time there's a commercial break where you're like, oh, yeah, that's who this guy is. Okay, I'm back up to speed. Now I can go.
It was... The way I described it in my notes was that it was over-described, like, to infinity. That was just... Everything had so much description to it that there was no question about what was happening ever. Like, you could tell exactly what it was, exactly how many engines the helicopter had on it, how many props the helicopter had on it, or how many knots they were traveling at as they traveled through the ocean, or whatever. It was just so over-described that, I mean, that's why the book was 650 pages. It probably could have been told in probably 250, 300 pages, but with so many descriptions all the time, like you said, constantly going back and refreshing our memories, it was a little overdone that way.
Well, I mean, it's pure dad lit, right? It's all these things about military equipment and tactics that dads are like, yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And the other thing about it that I noticed that it makes it fall into that dad lit category is that everyone in it is extremely good at what they do.
The best.
Yeah, they are the best. There's not any question that they are capable. The good guys, they do good things. The bad guys, they do bad things, and never the twain shall meet. But the thing that did bother me about everybody being so good is that the brief parts where there's some internal monologue, almost the characters' internal lives almost never matter.
Yeah. Oh, not at all.
Almost entirely irrelevant. But there are a few times when the characters are, especially Jack Ryan, are thinking and asking themselves these questions. And these questions are just the most numbskull questions you can possibly ask. This is one of the most capable guys. Deputy Director of Intelligence for the CIA. Up-and-comer, like future president, I believe, if my memory of the novels are correct. And he's asking just the most basic questions to himself in his head, like, is this legal? Is it okay if we do this? And I'm like, okay, so these are the thoughts that are going through the average reader's mind, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's just so ridiculous that these extremely high-performing intelligence agents are having the same questions. I mean, like, come on.
Yeah,
like,
this is your job, literally.
Right, like, if you would have maybe had these questions 15 years ago. I mean, I guess, like, intelligence agents aren't reading the book. It's us normal people, right?
That's why it's
that
written the way it
don't do
is.
this for a living. Yeah. So that did get to me, that the only internal life they have is all lame.
Yeah, and you don't hear about their relationships outside of work either. Like, it's briefly mentioned that Jack Ryan has a wife, or this guy has kids, or...
Oh boy. Okay, let's talk about Zimmer and his 7 children.
All 7 of them?
It doesn't even matter who they are. You just have to know that he has 7 children, because again, we're talking spoilers here. There's one face character that's a good guy that dies. And it's the guy.
You're right.
Well, okay, though there's a couple, but there's only one that's played for tears. And I'll admit, it got to me. I teared up. But there's this character, Zimmer, the guy with the 7 kids, who earlier in the book is introduced as the guy with 7 kids. And I'm wondering, like, why are we spending so much time on this guy who's, again, extremely good at his job, of course.
Yeah, the best.
Why so much backstory about this guy and his children and his wife that came from Vietnam or Laos or whatever? And then at the end, it's revealed. It's because he is going to get shot in the chest in the final, pretty exciting action
Yeah,
sequence.
for sure.
Actually, it's a pretty incredible sequence that I was just turning page after page reading it.
I couldn't put it down at that point.
But he gets shot only because it's going to be sad.
Yeah, that's accurate.
I've only thrown a book across the room once from being mad at it. And so that was like maybe 70% there with this one. Like, oh, come on.
Yeah. And yeah, that's it played that up so much. You kind of had to know that was going to happen. But that whole scene, that whole arc there where everything is happening, essentially the first 15 chapters, there's build-up, but everything happens in those last couple chapters, and it's a great section of the story, and it unfortunately ends with Zimmer, who by no means was he a big character. He played his role as the best gunner, or wait, was he the gunner?
He was the flight engineer and gunner.
Okay, yeah, he was the best at that job, and so he played his role perfectly, but even in that situation, he couldn't do everything perfectly, and I think that added to the book to the extent, like, I wish it wouldn't have been built up so much that, something was going to happen to him, but it was good to see someone kind of fail, even though he didn't really fail. It was good to see not everybody did everything perfectly.
Yeah, that's a good point. But I will, just to go back to that sequence at the end. So this is where, again, it felt really diagrammatic because all the different plots and different stories come together there at the end. But it's actually satisfying. It all makes sense. You've got the Coast Guard there who started the whole thing off by doing some crazy shenanigans, which I know we said we wouldn't do spoilers, but I don't want to spoil this because it's so much fun to read if you go back and read the book. It's right at the very beginning.
Yeah.
The Coast Guard section is great. They come in. The special ops soldiers that have been in the mountains of Colombia come in. Jack Ryan's there for mediocrely good reasons. Like, did he really need to be there? Who knows? There's the stuff that's happening in Washington, D.C. is great. Like, everything really comes together in that last 100 pages, 50 pages.
About.
That's pretty exciting to watch. Spoiler alert for the movie, not quite so much. But in the book, it's actually pretty exciting. I teared up when Zimmer died, even though I knew I was being manipulated.
Yeah.
The whole way along. Like, you still feel it. You still feel the excitement when the good guys get out.
Yeah. And, just barely, mind you.
Yeah, just barely, but they do get out and then just get set up for the future Jack Ryan. And also, I think this is the first introduction of the characters that end up being the Rainbow Six group.
Okay.
Where there's been video games and all kinds of stuff, kind of its own spin-off brand, but I think the characters for that are first introduced in this book. So I enjoyed reading it. I don't think it's a good book, but I really enjoyed it. The one annoying thing, so again, all the plots came back together at the end, right?
Yeah.
But there's all these other things that are set up that never pay off.
And there are things that didn't need to be there, like the brothers in the jail. I don't even understand why that scene existed. Like, I don't know why that other cop was killed exactly. There's a lot of things that I was like, this didn't add to the whole story overall. Yeah,
see, this is where, again, I feel that diagram. They're like, oh, shoot. What are we going to do about this plot thread that's open? Okay, we're going to have to introduce these brothers in the jail. They're going to kill these other guys. So, yeah, like, a lot of it feels like tying up loose ends because they realized, shoot, we gotta take care of this. Which is interesting because some of those parts were the ones that felt the least like Tom Clancy writing.
So you think that's where the ghostwriter might have been?
Yeah, there was a couple of sections that felt really tacked on in the I would say the back half. Like, there's a character. There's only one woman character in this, basically, right? Moira.
I want to talk about that a little bit later. But
great character, but she's a fully fleshed out character. And then you get towards the back half of the book, and there's like 3 references to other woman characters that are introduced. And the only thing they're introduced is like, oh, I bet she's good in bed.
Okay.
Where the hell did this come from?
Okay.
So that's when I thought, like, oh, so Tom Clancy wrote this woman character who's great. Some other hack must have come in to fill in this other stuff and been like, because it does, the characters who think that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Like, it's just so cheap and stupid. And like, well, maybe Tom Clancy's cheap and stupid, but the rest of it feels better.
Yeah, and I almost wrote a page about all this stuff about the women in this book, and Moira's character was played out perfectly. Like, I mean, I love that character.
You mean she's an actual human being?
Yeah, she actually can be. You can imagine her, and you can see what the emotion she's going through and all that. But then, like, these other characters, there's a crewman who was like, I don't even know what role she played, but to have her described as the captain looks at her and thinks, oh, she's as cute as a button, that just doesn't work with the rest of the book.
Oh, man, I remember that one. Yeah.
It felt so forced, and I was just like, I set the book down at that point, and I was like, that makes me angry, because I was already thinking, okay, there's no women in this book, really. It's all about men being the best at whatever they do. And then the one woman, Moira, I mean, she's good at what she does, but then she ends up being the weak link. And then any other woman that's introduced is, oh yeah, she's good in bed, or she's as cute as a button. Well, no one would say that.
I mean, to be fair, we're talking about late 80s, highly capable CIA and military operations here. There were not a lot of women there.
Yeah,
and so sure. Possibly this is an accurate representation of what these dudes would think. Who knows? But it was incredibly jarring. A few times that came up. Definitely. One of the other things
I thought the exact same
that got set up was good old Sergeant Ding Chavez and his ninja throwing stars.
Character. Oh,
great character. His lucky throwing stars, and then they just disappear. They don't matter at all. So this to me is the difference between a diagrammed plot and an actually well-written plot. Like, I'm going to bring it back to, I think, a 1988 movie, Die Hard. I don't know if you've seen it.
Oh,
but, like, that, to me, is one of the pinnacles of screenwriting. And this is a novel, not a screenplay. But nothing is introduced that doesn't pay off. A watch gets introduced at the beginning as this gift, pays off at the end. Somebody's name gets introduced at the beginning, pays off at the end. So many things in this book get introduced, and then you're like, oh, yeah, whatever happened to the Jackson brothers?
Oh, yeah.
Whatever happened to those?
Too much of that.
To those lucky throwing stars? Why do we spend so much time talking about them, and then nothing happens with them?
Nothing.
So there's a lot of maybe not plot loose ends, but thematic or just pieces that get dropped.
And I mean, with everything that's added, I can see how that happens, but it's unfortunate that it came out that way. So if we look at a grade for this, how would you grade this book?
Me, I'd give it a B-.
Okay.
So that's just barely a thumbs up, but I had enough fun reading it that it got there for me. It did not read like a 650-page book.
Yeah. I gave it a B myself because this is actually the first Tom Clancy book that I've read. I never got into him back in the day, and so it was enjoyable. It definitely, like you said, had some weak spots to it, and it was longer than it needed to be, but it was good, even if it was over-described. So
I will say this is
my take on this one.
This is not the best of the Tom Clancy books in my memory. Again, I haven't read these for some 30-odd years, 25-odd years. There are some really good ones. I remember Without Remorse being really good. That's all about Clark, who appears in this one, again, as an incredibly capable, never makes mistakes kind of guy. Hunt for the Red October, the one where Jack Ryan is introduced, I believe, was really great. So if you have time, go for reading some more.
Yeah, I think we get to read one more before too long.
Okay, but now I think we have to talk about the 1994 movie starring Harrison Ford.
All right. Quick synopsis. If you've read the book, don't watch the movie. There you go.
I think that's pretty fair because most of the things that happen in the movie are sort of like what happens in the book, but dumber.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and
Like-
the movie in itself is it's an entertaining movie. It's Harrison Ford going around kicking everybody's ass for some reason, but it's not Clear and Present Danger, the book.
Yeah, it's certainly capably directed. It is a classic 1990s dad movie. Again, guys being really good at what they do. Harrison Ford, a little bit too old to be playing the Jack Ryan character at this point, I think, but we'll give it a pass. It looks stylish enough. It's well lit. It's well edited. It's just kind of dumb and hard to follow. So what they try to do is they try to cram the entire story in, but take out a lot of the pieces of the diagram that actually hold it together. And so you're left kind of confused, and they make some changes to some characters that don't make any sense. So in the book, we've got this great Cuban spy, Cortez, who's a really good intelligence agent, and now here he's the big bad.
Yeah. And it bothered me that this was a Jack Ryan movie. And I felt, like I said, I didn't think this was really a Jack Ryan book, but the movie was all about Jack Ryan. It was all about Harrison Ford. And he was everywhere. He was even in places that he wasn't in the book. So
right, yeah, he had to be involved in every little thing. And the biggest disappointment for me about this movie was that nobody got hit by a bus.
Oh, I needed that. I needed that closure, but it didn't happen.
Yeah, so they didn't let the bad guy do the good thing, the bad thing of suicide. The right thing. They didn't let him jump in front of a bus. Instead, we're left kind of hanging there on the end. So there were a lot of changes from the book to the movie, and basically none of them I liked.
And
let me just give you a few rundowns. So the Moira character, the lone woman in the book who was actually fleshed out, gets like murdered halfway through the movie for no reason.
Yeah.
It's terrible. It's so dumb. There's a top secret bomb that is used to extremely cool effect in the book. Like this secret bomb that is made out of paper so that when it explodes, it looks like a car bomb went off. Really, really cool scene in the book. Again, over-described, but cool. And here in the movie, they do the same thing, except then Jack Ryan looks up this top secret bomb in a publicly available encyclopedia of weapons. And I'm like, what the hell?
Yeah, it was just there. It's accessible for everyone. Yep.
Right. I mean, they had to bring this in from the book, and so they had to find some way to shoehorn it into a movie that's like 2 hours.
Yeah.
2 hours, 10 minutes or something. It's just... It was just not good. It was just dumb.
And another thing that bothered me was that Cortez kind of like set up the whole hit job, but in the book he had nothing to do with that. And so there's just too many differences between the movie and the book for me to enjoy the movie. Like I said, if I hadn't have read the book, I probably would have enjoyed the movie more. But
yeah, maybe I should have watched the movie first.
Yeah, I think the book's the way to go. You got to read the book first.
I mean, to be fair, like we said, the book is 650 pages, and the movie is 2 hours and 20 minutes. Like that's clearly not an equal thing. Like you can't fit everything in there. But I feel like they took the wrong things out.
I agree. Yep, that's.
It was a huge success, though.
Oh,
the budget of like $60 million, and it made $220 million. So, as far as Hollywood's concerned, this is a huge success.
Yep, it did what they needed it to. Yeah,
I did think it was interesting that they made the movie about a fictional Colombian cartel, the Cali cartel, and not the actual real one, not the Medellin cartel, which is in the book.
Yeah. That was an interesting choice. Yeah, I guess I hadn't really thought about that much, but that's true.
Like, were they worried about blowback from the actual cartels? It's hard for me to remember how big of a deal drug smuggling and the Colombian cartels were in the U.S. in the early 90s. A little preview for our next episode where we'll be talking about the National Book Award winner from 1989.
Yes.
That one also features drug smuggling by sea.
It does.
So this must have been quite the thing on everybody's mind in the late 80s.
Well, I mean, we had the DARE program, so who knows? Maybe it was on everybody's mind.
Yeah, it must have been. My mind was mostly
I don't know if you were ever a part of that. I had to go through those classes.
I may have. It's again, this is many years ago. My recollections are iffy. Most of my attention in 1989 was probably taken on Star Trek, the original series, and waiting for the next Star Wars movie to come out 10 years later.
Yeah, you were in for quite a wait there.
Yeah. So this movie came out in 1994, and I don't remember it. I don't think I saw this in the theater. I may have watched it later after reading the book because a lot of it seemed pretty familiar. Like, I definitely knew who played Ritter.
Yeah.
Like, I could picture him in my head. I knew that's who it was. So I know I've seen this before, but it's so generic and forgettable.
Yeah.
Like, if you look at Harrison Ford's filmography from the 90s, it's just full of stuff like this.
Unfortunately,
of course, there's the other Jack Ryan movies. You got Air Force One. You've got The Fugitive, which I think in that era is probably his best. I still love that movie. Tommy Lee Jones, Searching for the One-Armed Man. It's a great movie, but they all kind of blur together for me.
Yeah, and I mean, he obviously was past his prime, not prime necessarily, but he had done his great work already, it feels like, and this was just kind of added in.
I want to argue with that, but I can't think of anything post this era with Harrison Ford that was spectacularly good. I don't really want to talk about the Star Wars sequels. Definitely don't want to talk about the Indiana Jones sequels.
Oh, man. Yeah, let's not get there.
Yeah, I don't know if you've seen the newest one.
I've seen enough of it to not want to watch the rest of it.
That's probably fair. So anyway, yeah, this was, I would say he must have been one of the highest paid actors in Hollywood at the time, because all these movies that we've talked about from the 90s were huge hits, made money.
Yeah.
And what else can you ask for? So I didn't love this one. I think this is going to land at a C- for me. This is where Batman landed for you. Like, it's just, maybe it's because I watched it right after reading the book, which is significantly better.
Yeah.
But it's just, it just didn't work for me.
And, it's kind of funny that we kind of flopped here, that I went with a C on this, just because as a standalone, if you don't even consider the book, this movie does what it's supposed to do, but it was so hard watching it after having read the book that I was just constantly going, what? No, that's so wrong. No, it's not like that. That didn't happen. Or it's the other way. He's not supposed to be there.
Yeah, and maybe that's not fair on my point, because again, I just finished reading the book and it was significantly better, and I just could not get on board with this movie. I couldn't separate myself enough from what I knew about the story to enjoy it.
I mean, we landed pretty close still. Like, I mean, we were both at a C-. So
we're gonna have to disagree at some point in the future, because that's what I want to hear.
I have a feeling it's gonna happen before too long. We're gonna be like, "What? You like this? Oh, it was terrible." But I don't know.
Well, maybe that'll happen next episode.
Ooh,
so in our next episode, we're going to be talking about the award winners from 1989.
Yes,
and the National Book Award winner for fiction that year was a book called...
It's an interesting book.
Yeah, it's called Spartina. I just finished it a couple days ago. The 1989 Best Picture Award winner, well, actually, I mean, the awards were in 1990. Movie came out in 1989. Was the famous Driving Miss Daisy, which I have not seen yet.
Yeah, I haven't watched it yet either. I wanted to save it till we get closer to the actual episode, kind of have fresh thoughts on my mind. Talking with some friends, though, I've heard that one was a little controversial win, but I think that happens every year at the Oscars, so...
Well, not last year. I think Oppenheimer was far, hands down, the best movie of 2023.
Well, I'm sure there's some years where that's the case.
And then the best album, the Grammy Award for Best Album, went to
Bonnie Raitt.
Bonnie Raitt.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so the album was it Nick of Time? Is that the one? I'm not looking
Let me pull up my spreadsheet here where I've collated all of the best things. It was Nick of Time by Bonnie Raitt.
And I have listened to that already, and it's, well, you know what? I'm going to save my thoughts for our next episode because it's going to be entirely different than what we did this time, I think.
Does it give us something to talk about?
Every single song.
Okay,
well, at least one or two of them. Maybe I was a little over-enthusiastic.
I think the only Bonnie Raitt song I know is Let's Give Him Something to Talk About, her duet with Tom Petty. Is that on this album?
Not this album, no. But this is
okay.
Well, we'll get to it next time. But anyway.
Okay.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Well, so that was part one of 1989. Some mediocre movies, a decent book, a pretty darn good album. So, so far 1989 is shaping up pretty well.
Yeah, and it's interesting that we both found the album to be our favorite part so far because it's something that neither of us had ever really dug into at all. And so it was fun to find that and appreciate it for what it was. So it's good for us, I think, to kind of look at something new. And I think this whole podcast is going to be great because we're going to dig into so many things that we've never experienced before either.
Yeah, I'm really proud of us for liking that album. So after 1998, I'm looking at our randomized Excel spreadsheet, and we've got 1989. We've got 1958.
That's the first year that we're going to be, or the earliest year we're going to be reviewing.
Yeah, 1958. And tentatively following 1958, we've got 2003.
Ooh.
Now, if you have some specific years that you'd really like us to talk about, why don't you send us an email about whatwasgoodpod@gmail.com, and we'll take that into consideration because our listeners know more than Microsoft Excel.
Yeah, and we're not particularly tied to any year in any order. So the fact that we get to read essentially the prequel to Clear and Present Danger, supposedly in like 12 months, that makes it a little more interesting. But yeah, so we'd love to hear from you guys.
Yeah, and I will give anybody a warning. When we get to 1995, we will not be reviewing the award-winning movie of the year. We will be reviewing Game 5 of the 1995 ALDS between the Seattle Mariners and the New York Yankees.
I can still picture.
And maybe also watching the John Boy 10-part YouTube series about the history of the Seattle Mariners.
Yeah.
So just a warning. 1995 is going to be all Mariners.
Sadly, didn't lead to a World Series title, but still one of the highlights of all Mariners fans that were alive then, at least.
Yeah, the World Series is coming this year. Trust me, I have a good feeling about this team.
Okay, I'm glad
you heard it here first. You heard it here first, listeners. If the 2024 Seattle Mariners win the World Series, I will get a tattoo. Hey. Yeah, I'll get my very first tattoo on my arm that says, "What was good?" No, that's not true. It'll be a Mariners logo, but I will. I will do it, and I will post pictures in the show notes. Do we have show notes?
Okay. We can make some up.
Well, anyway, thanks everybody for listening. Tune in next time for 1989 Part 2. And remember, listen to What Was Good on anywhere you get your podcasts that we actually find a place to publish. Yeah.
Thanks so much for checking us out, guys. And this is Zach and
Schuyler signing off. Bye.
see ya.